A policy document from the Trump regime presented a stark assessment of Europe's future, claiming the continent is on a path towards civilizational erasure within the next 2 decades due to factors like migration and European Union integration. This U.S. national security strategy, positioned as a guide to ensuring America's enduring preeminence and freedom, overtly signaled Washington's backing for Europe's nationalist and far-right political factions. The 33-page document, featuring an introduction signed by Donald Trump, acknowledged Europe's economic issues, but contended its real problems are even deeper. These problems were cited as encompassing actions by the EU that allegedly undermine national sovereignty and political liberty, alongside migration policies perceived as transforming the continent, suppression of political opposition and free speech, adding that should present trends continue, the continent will be unrecognizable in 20 years or less. To counter this trajectory, the document advocated for US policies that must include cultivating resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations. The strategy aims to enable Europe to assume primary responsibility for its own defense and called for opening European markets to US goods and services. The White House's release of the strategy underscores the regime's strong affinity with Europe's far-right nationalist movements, whose core platforms center on opposing perceived EU overreach and unchecked non-EU migration. In language that may be seen as provocative to traditional allies, the document stated the US should stand up for genuine democracy, freedom of expression, and unapologetic celebrations of European nations, individual character and history, encouraging its European political allies to champion this revival of spirit. The growing political strength of patriotic European parties, some of which are currently in government, supporting right-wing coalitions or leading in polls across EU member states, was described in the document as cause for great optimism. Trump's regime has previously sought closer engagement with European nationalist groups, including Germany's far-right Alternative für Deutschland, the AfD, a senior figure which visited the White House for high-level meetings in September and is the equivalent of the Nazi Party of old. Regarding immigration, the strategy document seemingly endorsed tenets of the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, which posts a deliberate substitution of ethnic white European populations by non-white groups. It claims it is more than plausible that within a few decades at the latest, some European NATO members will become majority non-European. The document argued that Europe must remain European, regain its civilizational self-confidence, and abandon its failed focus on regulatory suffocation. This lack of assurance, the text suggested, is also evident in Europe's stance on Russia, with the US regime seeking a rapid end to the Ukraine conflict, an outcome likely to favor Russian territorial gains. The document accused Europeans of displaying weakness. Despite a significant hard power advantage, it claimed many in Europe regard Russia as an existential threat. The strategy asserted that a core interest of the US to negotiate an expeditious end of hostilities in Ukraine, but noted Washington finds itself at odds with European officials who hold unrealistic expectations for the war, perched in unstable minority governments, many of which trample on basic principles of democracy to suppress opposition. It further claimed a large European majority desires peace in Ukraine, but this preference is not translated into policy in large measure because of those governments' subversion of democratic processes. This backward ideological stance, which favors Russia and seeks to criticize Europeans for protecting a sovereign nation such as Ukraine, echoes previous rhetoric from US figures such as Vice President J.D. Vance's harsh critique of European leadership at the Munich Security Conference earlier this year, where he accused EU leaders of stifling free speech and failing to address unauthorized migration. However, the document also conceded that Europe remains strategically and culturally vital to the US, highlighting transatlantic trade as a key pillar of the global economy. It acknowledged the US needs a strong Europe to help us successfully compete and work in concert with us to prevent any adversary from dominating Europe, expressing a desire to work with aligned countries that want to restore their former greatness. The backdrop to this Nazi-style policy document is the ongoing threat of transnational extremism. Recently, Spanish authorities and Europol's counterterrorism unit arrested 3 suspected members of The Base, a globally prescribed neo-Nazi terrorist group in Castellón province. The group's American leader, Ronaldo Nazário, currently residing in Russia, denounced the arrests as political persecution. The presence of this US-originated extremist movement, which advocates hyper-violence and models itself after armed insurgency, underscores the international spread of its Nazi-style ideology. Experts were particularly alarmed by the level of organization achieved by this Spanish cell, which publicly used a Telegram channel to recruit, share weapons, training photos, and call for militant action. The cell openly supported the group's operations in Ukraine, including efforts to establish a white ethno-state in the Zakarpattia region. Posts from the Spanish cell advocated for calculated ruthlessness and the acquisition of mountain lands to form protected, self-sufficient and self-managed white communities. The seized evidence included firearms, neo-Nazi iconography, cash and combat knives, with the cell leader reportedly in direct contact with Nazário. Nazário, a New Jersey native and former Department of Homeland Security analyst, has faced persistent allegations of being a Russian intelligence asset, claims that intensified when The Base began offering money for the assassination of Ukrainian military and political figures. Nazário has consistently denied these associations. The base's expanding presence in Europe coincides with reports of Kremlin operatives engaging in sabotage missions across the continent, often employing either unwitting individuals within criminal networks or far-right activists to carry out attacks. European law enforcement declined to comment on potential links between the Spanish cell and Russian intelligence, but analysts have voiced concern over the risk of Nazário, who's believed to be in St. Petersburg, directing activity in Europe. Domestically, the base remains active in the US, despite counter-terrorism investigations by the FBI that led to arrests, including 3 members who planned a mass shooting and bombing in Virginia 2020. However, some sources suggest a shift in FBI focus under Donald Trump, with resources reportedly being redirected away from pursuing cases against right-wing extremists. Analysts warn that the Spanish case closely mirrors previous patterns observed in the US, where the base members transition from ideological belief to offline action, including paramilitary-style training, tactical drills and shooting exercises, emphasizing the need for continued vigilance against the group's underlying ideology and online ecosystem. For now, Donald Trump's policy document on Europe's future and civilizational erasure must be taken very seriously, as he intends to pivot not just the US, but European allies towards the far-right and neo-Nazi thinking that could ultimately see a repeat of World War II. I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5-Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together.